Now I ask you directly, what really was Hamilton's DNF in Bahrain? A simple test mishap or the first sign that the SF26 is much more delicate than Ferrari wants to admit? Because what happened on that third day was not an unimportant abandonment. It was the exact moment in which Frédéric Vasseur went from excitement to anger in a matter of hours. While the internal telemetry showed surprising figures of degradation, consistency and hidden rhythm, externally there was only talk of clipping, frustration and abandonment. And therein lies the problem. Not in the ruling, but in what that failure reveals. The SF26 demonstrated something disturbing. When everything is in the window, it can be brutally fast. But when the energy management deviates just a few points, the car leaves the driver sold in the middle of the straight. Hamilton felt it. Ferrari saw it in the data. And Vasseur understood that he wasn't just dealing with a complex car, but with a narrative that could get out of control. The third day of testing at the Scuderia circuit was not simply another day of data collection for Ferrari. It was the day the team truly understood what kind of beast they had created with the SF26. While outside the focus was on Lewis Hamilton's DNF and the words that hinted at frustration, inside the story was much more complex and much more interesting. The morning began with a clear program. Long runs, sustained rhythm simulation and in-depth evaluation of energy behavior in real heat conditions. Bahrain is not forgiving in that regard. The long straights, the heavy braking in turn 1 and the traction zones mean that any weaknesses in the hybrid management are exposed. And precisely there Ferrari was looking for answers. Not fast times, not headlines, but consistency. And what they found in the first batches was surprising. The degradation figures were below what was projected. The car maintained a stable pace lap after lap. The working window, at least in certain temperature ranges, was wider than the simulator had anticipated. Internally there were comments of enthusiasm. The radical concept began to justify its technical aggressiveness. It was not a capricious car without direction, it had foundation. But the SF26 is not a conventional single-seater. It is extremely sensitive in energy management. The hybrid philosophy requires absolute precision. On the long straights of Bahrain, the phenomenon that would mark the day appeared: energy clipping. The battery died sooner than ideal, forcing Hamilton to perform lift and coast much more aggressively than planned. We are not talking about small adjustments, but about hundreds of meters before the breaking point. From the outside it seems like a simple test management. From within it is an alert. Because when the electrical deployment falls flat, the car loses thrust at the worst possible moment. The driver feels that the car is left without support just before braking. And although in a test you can allow yourself to experiment, that repeated sensation generates frustration. Hamilton began to convey discomfort. Not due to lack of speed in the slow corner where the car showed very promising traction, but due to the inconsistency in the final thrust of the straight. That is where the figure of Frédéric Vasseur comes in. After reviewing the complete telemetries, the analysis did not point to a technical disaster. The potential was there. The intermediate sectors were competitive. Slow corner exit traction was solid. The stability in certain phases of support was positively surprising. But overall balance depended on the entire hybrid system working within an extremely narrow range. And that margin was not always being met. The DNF came as a consequence of that context. Not as a sign of structural collapse, but as a reminder that the concept is still fragile in execution. And that's when the internal emotion changed. From fascination with the performance ceiling to anger at public exposure. Because from the outside there was only one word: abandonment. And in an environment where every detail is magnified, that can become ammunition for rivals and unnecessary pressure. After the DNF on that third day in Bahrain, Ferrari did not limit itself to checking the affected component. What he did was something much deeper. A complete dissection of the energetic and thermal behavior of the car in variable conditions. And what they found was not a catastrophic failure, but a pattern. A pattern that explains both the bright sectors and the moments of frustration. The SF26 has one very clear characteristic. When the hybrid deployment is perfectly synchronized with the downforce and tire temperature, the car is extremely competitive. The traction on slow corner exit is solid, the rear axle conveys confidence, and the passage through technical corners is stable. But the problem appears when one of those elements goes slightly outside its ideal window. We are not talking about big mistakes. We are talking about minimal deviations that alter the global balance. On the long straights of Bahrain, energy management depended not only on electrical consumption, but also on the way in which the driver had to modulate the throttle to protect the battery. That more aggressive lift and coast was not simply a strategic testing tool. It was an operational necessity to prevent clipping from being even more severe at the end of the straight. And that completely changes the perception of the car from the cockpit, because the pilot stops attacking to start managing. And here comes the most delicate point that Vasseur detects. The car demands too much precision in its execution. Not just the pilot, but the entire system. Engine maps, braking regeneration, battery temperature, dynamic aerodynamic balance. Everything has to align. If one of those factors isn't exactly where it should be, SF26 doesn't become slow, it becomes unpredictable. That unpredictability is what infuriates Vasseur. Not because the car is bad, but because it understands that such a radical concept does not allow improvisation. In test you can experiment. In the race, no. And if Hamilton already feels that inconsistency on a day of testing, what can happen when he is fighting wheel to wheel or defending position in the final laps? Furthermore, there is a political factor that cannot be ignored. When the pilot talks about uncomfortable sensations and the public image shows a DNF, the external narrative builds itself. Rivals listen. The media amplifies. And any sign of weakness can turn into additional pressure. Vasseur was not angry with the driver or the technical team for the specific failure. He was angry because he understood that the story could turn in a direction that did not reflect the full reality of the car. Internal analysis revealed something key. SF26's ceiling is high, very high, but its operating floor is narrow. And that means that the real work is not to redesign the concept, but to widen that window. Make the car less dependent on perfect conditions. Turn technical aggressiveness into usable performance, not just speed spikes. And this is where everything changes. Because after the initial fascination and subsequent anger, the moment of decision arrives. The third day in Bahrain did not end with a simple technical analysis. It ended with a clear order from management. Close ranks, shield the project, and redefine the way in which Ferrari is going to exploit the SF26. Vasseur understood something that could mark the entire season. The car does not need a revolution. You need control. It needs absolute discipline in how it is managed, how it is communicated, and how it is developed. Because the potential is there. The long runs showed it. The degradation was better than expected. The sustained pace when everything clicked was competitive. But the DNF exposed the fine line between peak performance and unnecessary exposure. The real discovery after that abandonment was not technical. It was strategic. Ferrari can't allow the external story to focus on clipping and frustration when internally they know the car has a very high roof. If rivals perceive weakness, they will press. If the media environment creates doubt, the pilot will feel it. And in a project so sensitive to precision, confidence is part of performance. Therefore, after the third day, the priority changed. It wasn't just about optimizing engine maps or adjusting regeneration. It was about widening the operational window. To make the SF26 less dependent on absolute perfection. To reduce the aggressiveness of the concept just enough so that the pilot can attack without constantly administering energy. The internal message was forceful. Calm outward, surgery inward. Millimetric analysis of each phase of hybrid deployment. In-depth review of the correlation between simulator and track. Fine adjustment of thermal parameters so that clipping does not affect the pilot's aggressiveness on a straight line. And above all, protection of the project against premature interpretations. Because if Bahrain made something clear, it is that this Ferrari is not a limited car. It is a demanding car. And the difference between both concepts is enormous. A limited car sets your ceiling. A demanding car forces you to live up to it. The third day of testing did not leave Ferrari weakened. He left her warned. It showed them that they are using a tool capable of fighting at the front. But that does not forgive errors in execution or minimal deviations in energy management. And that, in such a tight championship, can be both a brutal advantage and a constant risk. Now the final question that defines everything. Will Ferrari be able to tame the SF26 before outside pressure tries to tame Ferrari? The third day of testing in Bahrain was not the day Ferrari discovered an irreparable problem. It was the day he understood the magnitude of the challenge at hand. Lewis Hamilton's DNF did not uncover a structural weakness of the SF26. It uncovered something more uncomfortable and at the same time more promising. They are looking at a car with real fighting potential at the top, but that requires almost surgical execution. Frédéric Vasseur did not come away worried about pure speed. Internal data showed controlled degradation, consistent pacing, and very competitive performance peaks when everything came into window. The anger was not because of the abandonment itself, but because of what it symbolizes in an environment as sensitive as modern Formula One. Because when the operating margin is tight, any deviation is amplified. And when the external narrative starts to revolve around clipping and frustration, the damage can be greater than the failure itself. Ferrari understood that its real challenge is not to make the SF26 faster. It is to make it more usable. Widen that window where the car goes from being brilliant to being demanding. Reduce extreme dependence on energy precision, giving the driver the confidence to attack without having to manage every meter of straight. In short, convert potential into repeatable performance. Bahrain left a clear warning: the ceiling is high, but the balance is fragile. And in a season where every detail counts, the difference between dominating and suffering may lie in how they managed that fragility in the first races. Ferrari did not leave that third day weakened. He came out conscious. And sometimes that early awareness is what separates teams that react in time from those that discover their limits when it's too late. Let me know in the comments what you think about all this.